I never thought my life would become the kind of broken marriage drama you usually hear about in whispered conversations or read in emotional relationship stories online. But this is my truth, and I'm telling it from the beginning because only then will you understand how betrayal and heartbreak can shatter a man's soul, and also how far he's willing to go when pushed into a corner. My name's Imran, I'm 38, a regular guy. I've been married to Aisha for almost 12 years. To the outside world, we were the picture of stability, a good job, a decent home, 2 beautiful kids. But life has a way of hiding its cracks beneath polished surfaces. And sometimes those cracks widen into deep chasms that swallow everything. It started slowly. The signs. Subtle, almost invisible if you didn't know your wife like I knew mine. Aisha had always been attentive, a little shy even, but over the past year, something shifted. She started dressing differently, nothing too revealing, but deliberate. More perfume, longer hours at the gym, her phone glued to her hand like it was her lifeline. I told myself not to overthink. People change, right? Maybe she was just finding herself after years of being a mom and homemaker. But deep down, I couldn't silence the gnawing thought, what if she's seeing someone? Still, I ignored it. I buried myself in work. Until one night, everything I feared came crashing through my front door. It was a Saturday evening. The kids were at my parents'. Aisha said she was heading out to meet a friend. I didn't question it. I stayed home, scrolling my phone, sipping tea, convincing myself I wasn't paranoid. Then, around 9 p.m., a knock at the door. A hard, insistent knock. I opened it, and there stood a man I had never seen before in my life. Tall, confident, maybe late 30s. He smelled of cologne and arrogance. And the first words out of his mouth froze my blood. "I'm the guy your wife's been sleeping with." Just like that. No hesitation. No introduction. No shame. I stared at him, not comprehending. "What did you just say?" He smirked. "You heard me. Aisha. Your wife. She's mine. Has been for months. Thought you should know. If you're still listening, don't forget to like this video. Trust me, it's only going to get darker from here." My first reaction wasn't anger. It was disbelief. Shock. My ears buzzed. My chest tightened. I looked at this stranger in my house and thought, why would a man I've never met say something like this? I wanted to throw him out, slam the door, erase those words. But my body wouldn't move. "Prove it," I finally muttered. He chuckled, reached into his pocket, and pulled out his phone. Within seconds he was showing me pictures. Pictures of Aisha. In restaurants. In his car. And then my heart stopped. Pictures of her in lingerie, in our bedroom. The room spun. My hands trembled. That broken marriage drama I always thought belonged to other people had just invaded my life. I remember whispering, "Why are you telling me this?" His grin widened, cruel. "Because she told me she'd never leave you. Thought I should let you know what kind of wife you really have. Maybe then you'll step aside." Step aside? As if I were just a placeholder husband while he took my family, my home, my life? I slammed the door in his face and locked it, my chest heaving, rage burning my insides. I wanted to run to Aisha, demand answers, scream, cry, but I couldn't move. For hours I sat in the dark, replaying his words, the images burned into my mind. Around midnight Aisha returned. Smiling. Humming softly as she set her purse down, as if nothing had happened. I stared at her, my throat dry, my fists clenched. "Where were you?" I asked. She froze. Just for a second. Then she smiled again. "I told you. Meeting a friend." That smile. I'd seen it 1,000 times before. But now it looked different. It looked like a mask. "A man came here tonight," I said, my voice trembling. "He said you've been sleeping with him. He showed me pictures. In our bedroom, Aisha. Our bedroom." The color drained from her face. Her smile faltered. And in that moment I knew. I didn't need more proof. Her silence was my answer. My heart shattered. Betrayal and heartbreak in their purest form. The woman I loved, the mother of my children, had turned our marriage into a lie. Say something, I demanded. Tell me it's not true. Tell me he's lying. But she didn't. Her lips parted, her eyes watered, but no words came. I stormed upstairs, locking myself in the bedroom. For hours I paced, wrestled with thoughts of revenge on a cheating spouse, of leaving her, of exposing her. But my kids' faces kept flashing in my mind. Could I really tear apart their world because their mother betrayed me? The next morning, she tried to talk. She cried, begged, swore it was a mistake. It didn't mean anything, Imran. Please, please don't leave me. Her tears cut deep. But I couldn't trust them. Were they real, or just another performance in this broken marriage drama? I spent the next week in a daze, moving through life like a ghost. At work, I stared blankly at my computer. At home, I avoided her. At night, I replayed every detail of our past, searching for the moment she chose betrayal over love. And then the messages began. From him. The stranger. Mocking texts. She's thinking of me while she's lying next to you. How's it feel knowing she prefers me? He wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was taunting me, enjoying my collapse. And that's when something inside me shifted. I realized this wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. This was about respect. About dignity. About standing up to the man who thought he could destroy me. But before I could act, I needed the full truth. I couldn't live in shadows anymore. So one night I followed Aisha. She said she was going to her sister's. Instead, she drove across town, parked outside a cafe, and there he was. The same man. Waiting for her. I sat in my car, watching them embrace, watching my wife laugh like she hadn't laughed with me in years. My chest burned, but my mind was ice cold. This wasn't just a cheating wife story anymore. This was war. Comment below, what would you do if you were in my place? Forgiveness or revenge? I decided that night, he had made a fatal mistake coming into my house, humiliating me. And soon, he would learn just how big that mistake really was. I didn't sleep the night I saw them together at that cafe. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The betrayal wasn't just in the affair anymore, it was in her laughter. Her comfort with him, the ease with which she gave him the parts of herself that used to belong to me. I wanted to storm out of the car, drag her away, scream at him, but I didn't. I waited. Because I realized something, anger was what he wanted. He thrived on my humiliation, on knowing he had invaded my marriage and my home. If I wanted to win this emotional relationship story, I needed patience, not impulse. When Aisha came home that night, she acted as if nothing had happened. She slipped into bed beside me, whispering, "Good night." I didn't respond. My body stiffened with rage. I wanted to confront her, but I stayed silent, because now I was planning something bigger. The next week was torture. I watched her more closely than ever before. Every time her phone buzzed, every time she smiled at the screen, my stomach twisted. I noticed new patterns, late-night showers, perfume before errands, her phone face down at dinner. She thought she was clever. But I was already several steps ahead. I installed a small tracking app on her phone. I hated myself for it, but I needed the truth, the full picture. And within days it confirmed what I already knew: hotel visits, late-night drives across town, long hours, shopping, that led straight to him. If you're still listening, don't forget to like this video. The twists in this cheating wife story are just beginning. One night, after she left for one of her secret meetings, I followed her. She didn't notice my car trailing her at a distance. She pulled up to a quiet hotel. My heart pounded as she went inside. Minutes later, he arrived. I sat there, staring at the glowing sign of that hotel, my chest heavy with betrayal and heartbreak. I thought of my children. Of how, one day, they might learn what their mother had done. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting their future, their dignity. The next day, I confronted her, not with anger, but with calm precision. Aisha, I said, setting my phone on the table. I know where you've been. The hotel. The cafe. Him. Her fork clattered against her plate. Her face went pale. Imran, please. Don't lie. Don't insult me further. I slid the phone toward her, the tracking data glowing on the screen. Her tears flowed instantly. It was a mistake, I swear. He means nothing. Please, for the kids, for us, let's move past this. But how do you move past a knife lodged in your chest? That night, I sat alone in the dark, replaying her pleas. Forgiveness versus revenge in marriage. It was a war raging inside me. On one side, the man who still loved the woman he married. On the other, the betrayed husband craving justice. And then the stranger made his move again. A message popped up on my phone from an unknown number. She was beautiful tonight. Better than last time. You'll never satisfy her like I do. My hands shook. My vision blurred with fury. It wasn't enough that he stole her. He wanted to break me entirely. I called him. My voice was ice. Meet me. Man to man. He laughed on the other end. Finally. Where? Tomorrow. 10 p.m. The old factory lot by the river. It was an isolated place. Dark. Abandoned. Perfect. When I hung up, my plan began to form. He thought this was just a game, just another chapter in some real-life cheating story where the husband plays the fool. But I was done being the fool. The next evening I prepared. Gloves. A small recorder. And just in case, a steel pipe I kept in the trunk. I didn't know if I'd use it, but the thought of his smug face fueled a darkness in me I'd never felt before. At exactly 10 p.m., I stood by the rusted gates of the factory. The night air was thick, silent, except for the distant hum of the river. My chest tightened as headlights approached. He stepped out of his car, smirking as always. So, the husband finally grows a backbone. I said nothing. My fists clenched. You know, he continued, walking closer. She begs for me. Cries out my name. You can't compete with that. Each word was a blade. My pulse roared in my ears. Why are you doing this? I demanded. If you want her, take her. Why humiliate me? He laughed coldly. Because it's fun. Because watching you squirm makes it even better. You're weak. That's why she chose me. Something in me snapped. I lunged at him, grabbing his collar, slamming him against his car. His grin didn't fade. He thrived on my rage. Hit me, he taunted. Prove you're a man. For a second, the pipe in my trunk flashed in my mind. One swing and it would all end. But then, my kids' faces appeared again. If I crossed that line, I'd lose them forever. Instead, I shoved him hard and stepped back, my breath ragged. You've made a fatal mistake coming into my house, into my life. And you'll pay, not with blood, but with exposure. His grin faltered. What do you mean? I pulled out my recorder. It had captured every word of his taunts, his admissions. Proof of the affair. Proof of his harassment. You thought you were clever, I hissed. But now I have you. Every lie, every detail, you're finished. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. I walked away, leaving him standing in the dark. When I got home, Aisha was waiting, her face swollen from crying. Where were you? She asked weakly. I looked at her, the woman I once loved more than life itself. Planning our future, I said coldly. Because now, it wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about reclaiming control, about turning their secret against them. If you're still with me, subscribe for more shocking real-life style stories. Because what came next wasn't just confrontation, it was destruction. Over the next week, I gathered everything. Messages, pictures, the recording. Piece by piece, I built a case. Not for court, but for leverage. If she wanted to stay, it would be on my terms. If she wanted to leave, she'd leave with nothing. The night I finally confronted her with the evidence, she collapsed to her knees, sobbing. "Please, Imran. Don't ruin me. Don't ruin the kids' lives. I'll do anything." And that's when I realized the true power had shifted. Comment below, would you forgive, or would you make them pay? When you live with betrayal, time stretches. Days become a slow, grinding machine that chews up hope and spits out something raw and unfamiliar. After I left him in that factory lot, something inside me had changed. I felt stripped down to bone. I no longer recognized the man who had once trusted so easily, laughed so readily, who'd fallen asleep every night believing he was enough. But I also felt a clarity I hadn't known in years. The evidence I had, messages, photos, the late-night location logs, and the recording, wasn't only proof of their affair. It was leverage. It was a way to stop the humiliation. That terrified me. Leverage can become a weapon that destroys everything in its path. Revenge on a cheating spouse sounded sweet in the dark, but the morning light always asks different questions. I wanted to win. But I didn't want to lose what mattered most, my children. And beneath that, there was another voice, a tired, stubborn part of me that still loved Aisha, despite everything. Love had not disappeared, it had simply been trampled by deception. That love demanded that I act in a way that would leave my family standing afterward. A few days after the factory meeting, I hired a lawyer. I don't say that like it was some dramatic move. It was practical. I needed someone who knew the rules of a war I'd been pushed into. We were cautious. We documented everything. Not to make a spectacle, but to protect our children and to have options open. If you're still listening, take a moment, hit like. This story isn't just another cheating wife story, it's about choices we make when our world fractures. We scheduled a family meeting, one evening, or at least I called it that to make it sound harmless. I told Aisha we needed to talk about our future. She said yes, relief painted across her face, because she thought we'd talk reconciliation. I let her believe that for a little while. When the kids were at their grandparents' house, when the house hummed with the quiet of absence, I set the table and sat across from her with the phone playing the recording loud enough for both of us to hear. The admission she had once given him, his arrogant boasts, his taunts about taking her, played clearly. I muted it occasionally to watch her reaction. She tried to speak, to interrupt, to make it into regret, but the audio didn't lie. Her eyes, which had once been my harbor, were now a labyrinth of shame and anger, and a desperate plea for something I could no longer hand out without price. "Why?" I asked, quieting my voice so it sounded small in the room. "Why did you let this happen? Why all the lies?" She flinched, like the words physically struck her. "Imran, I felt lost. You were always busy. I felt invisible. He made me feel seen. It was wrong, I know. I'm sorry." "Sorry," I repeated. The word tasted like ash. "Do you know what sorry does? Does it fix the nights I came home and you pretended? Does it fix the trust you tore to pieces?" She sobbed, a broken pleading. "We can fix it. I'll stop. I'll leave him. I swear." I didn't want to be cruel. But I also couldn't let the next weeks be a performance. I'd replayed her pleas 1,000 times. I needed terms, not vengeance, but accountability. I needed a plan that protected my children from further deceit. "You will stop," I said, "and we'll go to counseling. You'll give me full access to your phone. No secrets. You'll move back to how things were." I could hear the bargaining tone in my voice, the man who still wanted to rebuild. "If you betray me again, if you contact him, meet him, or hide things, then I will take the evidence to the authority, and I will file for divorce." She nodded violently, relief and fear warring on her face. She promised. She cried. I wanted to believe her. That night I slept poorly, though not from suspicion. I slept from exhaustion of having to make the hard choices. Forgiveness versus revenge in marriage isn't a single decision. It's a slow accumulation of decisions. Each time you choose to stay, to forgive, to rebuild, you place a stone on a path. Each time you choose retribution, you widen the chasm. Days passed, and for a while, she followed the new rules. She answered where she was, she met me for coffee at lunchtime, she sat in a counselor's office and said things with trembling honesty. Slowly, there were small mendings. Not enough to erase months of betrayal, but enough to begin. Then came the text that made my stomach drop like an anchor. It was from an unknown number. She's lying. I saw her at the mall last night. It was a taunt wrapped like a threat. I thought of confronting him again. I thought of showing up at his job and ripping his smugness away. But I remembered the pipe in my trunk, the flashing idea of violence, and how close it had come to crossing lines I could never uncross. I had to be better. I had to outplay him without becoming him. Instead, I went to the only place that had given me clarity, law. My lawyer advised me to handle this through the proper channels. Trespass, harassment, obscene messages, there were laws. He explained that the recording I had might be evidence of harassment and coercion if it showed clear intimidation. The photos, the messages, combined, formed a pattern that could be used to protect my family. We filed a complaint, formal, cold, and carefully worded. I presented the evidence, the timeline, the messages. The police were surprisingly efficient in the face of modern harassment. They called him in for questioning within days. He was arrogant at first, like he stood above the reach of law. But when officers showed up at his house with evidence, and a recording that contained his own admissions, his smugness cracked. He tried to act indignant. "It's a personal matter, not your business." But the investigation broadened quickly when more victims came forward. It turned out he had a pattern, other married women, other reckless seductions. The police took it seriously. He was charged with harassment and trespassing in some of the cases, and an arrest was made. The public exposure broke him in ways my fists never could. Watching him led away in handcuffs felt bizarre. The satisfaction I imagined didn't arrive like fireworks. There was only a numbness and a small, private relief. The man who had mocked me and invaded my life was now facing consequences that stripped him of his swagger. That was justice, not revenge. And justice felt clear. The day he was arrested, Aisha came to me and wrapped her arms around me, sobbing, like the whole thing had been a nightmarish lesson she had finally woken from. "I'm sorry," she said again, but this time there was a new humility in her voice. "I was so selfish." I wanted to let her in, to feel the old comfort, but the new rules I had set for myself were not about punishment. They were about trust rebuilt slowly, piece by piece, if at all. I had to think of our children. I had to think of my own dignity. Counseling continued. We sat on those uncomfortable couches and bled out truth. We spoke of small things, how guilt filled the corners of the house, how my son had asked about why Mama was sad, how my daughter was clutching at the same blanket she used to when she was little. I watched Aisha learn to hold herself accountable in ways that weren't performative. She admitted everything in plain terms. It was the first honest act between us in months. Still, honesty doesn't immediately repair the past. I discovered, slowly and painfully, that some traumas leave scars you live with, not erase. My nights were sleepless for a long while. I woke up at 3 a.m., heart pounding, from dreams where he stood at the door again. The betrayal had rewired my responses. There were moments of anger that still flared. I remember standing in the kitchen one night, a memory rushing in, a flashback of the first time we'd held hands, a picnic by the river when everything seemed endless and ours. I wanted to rip that memory into pieces, but then I looked at the kids in the next room, laughing at some silly cartoon. They belonged to both of us. They were innocent, and I couldn't punish them for the choices of their mother. We reached a fork in the road 3 months after the arrest. The prosecutor offered a conditional plea deal for him that included admitting guilt to harassment charges and staying away from our neighborhood. In exchange, some charges were dropped. It was not enough to erase what they had done, but it offered me a kind of closure, a legal acknowledgement. We accepted. The court made orders, restraining terms, probation, and mandatory counseling for him. He lost his freedom in small, sterile legal increments. And Aisha? She made changes. She left social media for a while. She quit that gym where she'd met him, because she admitted later that it had become a place where she felt important. She worked tirelessly in therapy, learning what her actions had cost the family. She started attending parenting groups, coming home early, helping with homework, being present in ways she hadn't been for years. Over time, trust returned like a wary guest, not entirely comfortable, but present. It took months of consistent small acts, a phone left face up on the table, shared passwords in an agreed trust plan, a calendar of our family time that she stuck to. The rebuilding was not cinematic or clean. It was tedious. It required humility on both sides and a constant commitment to truth. There were temptations to make a spectacle, photos dumped online, a dramatic public confession staged for the gossip-hungry. I considered it. Revenge on a cheating spouse can feel cathartic to many. But I knew spectacle would only feed the vultures and deepen wounds. I wanted our children to keep their childhood unpublicized. I wanted them to have a home that felt safe, not one that was stripped bare for strangers' entertainment. Months turned into a year. The worst of the sting dulled to an ache that lived in my chest like an old scar. I learned to sleep again. I laughed without feeling guilty. Sometimes I would catch Aisha looking at me across the dinner table, regret and gratitude woven into her expression. Once, when the kids had both fallen asleep early and the house was quiet, she walked up to me, fingers timid, and placed her hand on mine. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to be a partner. I want to earn it." Her words were honest. That was everything. She didn't demand absolution. She asked for a chance to rebuild what she had broken. It would not be my naive, blind trust. It would be earned, slowly, stubbornly, painfully. On the day the stranger's sentence was finalized, I felt an odd closure. He would face consequences. He would also, the court hoped, learn whatever lesson the judicial system can give. But the real work, the life work, was within my house, mending the threads of a marriage that had been chewed by deceit. We never went back to how things were before. Some doors cannot be unlatched once opened. But we found a shape I could live with. We found routines, rituals, and new ways to talk. Some nights the old fear would reappear and I would tell myself the truth, that I had survived this. That I had chosen a path that protected my children, preserved my dignity, and sought justice rather than vengeance. To anyone listening who has been through betrayal, know this: the path you choose matters. You can choose vindication and ashes. Or you can choose to protect what remains, your children, your future, your peace. Forgiveness isn't weakness. Sometimes it is strength wrapped in scars. Months later, a neighbor asked me, blunt as ever, "Did you get justice?" I thought of the man in handcuffs, the court papers, the counseling sessions, the nights I held my children and whispered truths. "Yes," I said slowly. "In a way I needed." If you've stayed with me, subscribe for more shocking real-life style stories. And comment below, what would you have done? Would you fight, forgive, or walk away? One last lesson I learned: love is not a guarantee of fidelity. It is a practice. You practice it with honesty and presence. If the other person refuses, you must decide whether love alone is enough to rebuild a life, or if dignity and protection demand a different path. In my case, I chose both justice and opening a door to possible reconciliation, on my terms. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't cinematic. But it was mine. In the end, the stranger had indeed made a fatal mistake, but not the fatality he intended. He fatally underestimated the house he had invaded, the law, the love that still existed beneath the rubble, and a husband who would not be humiliated into silence. The fatal mistake was thinking he could break us without consequences. He did break something. He broke illusions, and in doing so, he forced us to find a truer version of ourselves.